here. Today we are going to make a beef carbonade stew with some pear crisp and a lovely grilled cheese using some Diablo Gouda and some salami. So let's start out by crisping up our bacon for our beef carbonade. We're doing a kind of a quick version of the beef carbonade where we're going to saute off our meat, remove it out, keep it nice and tender, and then we'll stew up the vegetables and everything like that. You can do two variations. One is a longer kind of cooked stew where then you could just take this whole thing and pop it in the oven and stew it for an extra hour to make it extra tender, or you can do kind of the quick version where you sear off the meat to a nice medium rare and then pop it back in at the end to kind of keep it tender that way. But we're gonna snip up our bacon, almost like bacon bits, and we're gonna sear it off in here, and then so then we'll have that nice fat to cook up our meat in, and then our veggies in there, and that's gonna give this really wonderful flavor to our stew, which is kind of where you get the term like the carbon in there for the carbonade. Think of like carbonara and all that bacon, essentially. We'll get this. There we go. And turn my Dutch oven on. And we're going to get those toasting up. I'm going to wash my hands real quick. And while our bacon is cooking up, we can work on our pears for our pear crisp. So let me grab a paring knife for our pears. And we're going to slice them up, stew them up for a little bit. They don't need to stew as long as apples because pears are a lot more soft and not as firm. But I have several pears that are ready to go. And you don't want your pears to be too firm on there, but typically once they start to get little brown spots on them, they're kind of perfect for cooking with because that's when they're nice and sweet. So I'm going to peel them because I don't love the skins on pears when they're cooked, but that's not necessary. Unlike an apple, pears skins do get a bit more tender, and so they're not as chewy on there. So you can keep them on and save a little bit of time if you want to. But I like to peel them off. It gives a nicer kind of texture, I think. So we're going to slide this through, take kind of their seeds out, and then I'm just going to peel off the skin. I've got 4 Bartlett pears here, and we're going to give them a nice peel, and then we'll slice them up. And then we're going to, stew them for just a little bit, put a little bit of brown sugar in, and cinnamon, vanilla, splash of lemon juice, and then we'll give a little bit of butter and then cornstarch to kind of thicken up the base, and then we're going to make our crumb topping to kind of sprinkle over the top for our crisp, and then we'll pop it into the oven to bake up. Here. But nice thing to do, especially since, pears are kind of in season right now. So they're good winter fruit. And change it up from like an apple on here. They're lovely. They taste very similar to apples on there. A little bit more fragrant in the flavor. But I do love them. Good option. And a bit more tender. So we'll get these guys are going on here. And then we'll work on our stew a little bit, kind of a nice hearty stew. We're going to be using in our stew, kind of what we're seasoning it up with is rosemary, thyme, garlic. I have some parsley and green onions that we'll add towards the end, mushrooms, enoons, some carrots, tomato paste, a little bit of beer, which will add to the broth base to it, and then of course beef broth on there. But it's just a nice hearty beef stew. We'll add a little bit of flour, act as a nice kind of thickener for it, since it is a nice stew base on there. But really great. It's been really, really cold here in Tennessee, so it's perfect for your winter soup weather. I'm going to give my bacon a quick toss. Let me grab some tongs here and give it a nice stir. I'm going to turn my Dutch oven down just a smidge. And we'll let that bacon kind of render out its fat. There we go. And again, this is going to add just a really great flavor to the stew. That bacon just really makes it pop. It just highlights it. It's one of those things where even the smallest amount of bacon just really has with such a wonderful flavor. Here, let's get these guys up and going. Now we'll have these kind of toasting or cooking up in our little Dutch oven, which we'll then bake in the oven. Pears don't need to cook quite as long. Like we don't have to do a pre-cook on them as long as apples because they are a bit more of a soft fruit on there. But you do want to give them a little bit of a cook on there. That way we can kind of add our cornstarch into it to create that kind of thickness to it and just give them a little bit of a tenderness.
You have a question, where are your recipes available?
So we do upload all of our videos to the link on our page, so you can always re-watch to cook all of our things. I try to go through every ingredient, measurement and how long we cook it. So always re-watching to cook, make everything. And then for our members, we do send out a couple recipe cards a month for our members on there. But everybody is able to re-watch videos and just kind of cook along with me again. And my goal this year, I'm working on it, is to get a cookbook out for everyone. I'm in the process. I've started on it. So hopefully we'll have that done on there. I already have, for over 100 recipe cards made up, which I'm going to be kind of incorporating into my cookbook, as well as some new ones to kind of make it out, because I want to make sure I have a well-rounded cookbook with some great sections in there, that has both sourdough and some soup recipes and meal ones on there, because I love soups and sourdough and all the different things you can use with discard and everything. Okay, did I already peel all 4 of those up? Perfect. We're going to get these nice and kind of sliced up. Instead of doing long ones, I'm going to kind of cut them on their side for them. With pears, I'm going to leave them a little bit thicker than I would apples because they are a softer fruit, and that means they'll get a little bit more tender. And if you kind of overcook them or cut them too small, they'll get more mushy. So leaving them in a slightly bigger slice. That way they kind of still keep their form. There. And this is like a perfect small size apple crisp on here, or not apple crisp, pear crisp, which it's nice when you don't have to commit to a huge dessert, but you have just something that's lighter, kind of a single serve where you don't have a lot of leftover. Get these guys in here. Okay. I'm going to get rid of my peels, and then I'm going to wash my hands. We'll get our bacon a nice little stir, and then we're going to add some spices into our pears, and we'll get them kind of going. Just going to scrape off any of those little bacon pieces that are sticking. I'm going to give, just a little bit of butter to my bacon here. Sometimes I have noticed that sometimes the bacon cuts aren't super high on fat recently, which means they don't render down enough fat to make them crispy. And I have found the only way to kind of remedy that is just to add a little bit of extra butter to it so that there is more fat for it to crisp up. So I added about a teaspoon. That way I have a little bit more fat in there for it to crisp up on there, because my pan is a good size and there's just not enough in there to crisp it up nicely. For our pears, I'm going to add in about a teaspoon of butter as well. This is going to kind of work with the cornstarch later to keep it nice and like smooth, get sort of that chalkiness for it. We're going to turn our back burner on. We're going to add in about a half a teaspoon of vanilla. Juice from half a lemon.
It's Wanda's birthday today.
Oh, happy birthday, Wanda. Hope you have a great day. Say, January birthday. I was supposed to be born in January, but I never came. I had to be evicted in early February. There we go. So I've got my lemon juice in there from just half a lemon. Now we're going to add in brown sugar. You do not need as much sugar as if you were working with tart apples. Pears are a lot sweeter, so less goes more with it. Otherwise, if you add too much, then it becomes really, really sweet.
Paula sent you.
Thank you, Paula. We appreciate that. We're going to add in just under a half a cup of brown sugar because, again, pears are quite a bit sweeter than apples. And we have that lovely crisp topping on top, which gives a little bit of extra sweetness. And then we're going to add some cinnamon in as well. Good shake over. Around, around a half a teaspoon or so. And then mix these all up and kind of coat them. Losing some of my cinnamon out the back, or my sugar. And then we're going to let them kind of stew up and kind of let their natural juices come out. Pears are also a bit juicier than apples as well. Okay, I've got a little bit of sugar on my hand, so give that a quick rinse. Let's give our bacon a nice little stir. There we go. Okay, it's almost there. Let's get our crumb topping made so that when our pears are done, we'll be ready to stew them up. So let me grab a bowl for this. So we're going to start off with a half a cup of melted butter. There we go. And then we're going to add in a half a cup of brown sugar. And you're going to want to make sure it's firmly packed. And then we're going to add in, let's give this a quick mix. Let me grab a spoon real quick. Mix our sugar and our butter together. It's going to kind of make a brown sugary syrup. And I'm using light brown sugar, but if you want a little bit more depth, a little bit more of that molasses flavor, you can use a dark brown sugar as well. There we go. Okay. Now we're going to add in about a half a teaspoon of cinnamon. A couple good shakes. Half a teaspoon of salt. Half a teaspoon of baking powder, which is going to give this kind of crisp a nice puff to it. And then a half a teaspoon of, or not half a teaspoon, half a cup of oats. I'm using old-fashioned. You can also use quick oats. Just don't use steel cut oats. Those will give you steel cut oats are really hard. And so they just won't turn out well in here. So we got our half a cup of our oats here. Let's mix this up. And then we'll coat it all and then we'll add our flour in. But I like to make sure all of these ingredients are mixed up well so that when we add our flour in, it will work well.
Yo has a question for you.
What is for dinner tonight? You are stealing my pears out of my thing. Tonight, I actually have a plan. I made it yesterday, so it was kind of what we were going to do for yesterday's dinner. So we're going to do chicken wings, twice baked potatoes, and corn muffins. And then we'll throw in some other vegetable as well. So maybe a salad.
What kind of oats are you using?
Old-fashioned oats. So just the good old classic. You can use quick oats as well. Just don't use the steel cut oats. Give our bacon one last kind of mix around. We'll let those, there we go. And now we're going to add in about 3/4 of a cup of flour into our base here. And this is going to be our crumb mixture. But let me give our pears a nice stir here. Look at that, looking lovely.
That's a good question for you. You ever make cake or cupcakes just out of a box?
You know what? Yes, there is one cake I make out of a box. And it is because, you know what, I grew up on this cake and you can't beat it. Funfetti cake out of a box. It is a favorite in our family, you know, and we love it. And that is it's one cake that my kids will request on like a birthday. Typically, that's the cake Torin always requests on his birthday. He requested a red velvet this year, which surprised me. But it's typically the funfetti cake that he always requests. That is the one cake that I typically make out of the box. Because there's actually, you have to use, you can't replicate a funfetti cake necessarily on its own because there's a special coating on the sprinkles that prevent them from dissolving in the cake batter. Otherwise, your cake will turn to like a brown mess on there. So, and it's just delicious. But I don't just make it straight out of the box. I do change the recipe. So I switch out oil for butter. I add an extra egg and I switch out the water for milk. So I do change the recipe a little bit to make it a little bit more of a home style cake. But yes, that is the one cake I definitely make out of the box. There we go. So we're adding our 3/4 of a cup of flour in here. And sometimes I add a little bit more just depending on how the crumb looks like at the end. Now you don't want to like cream this at all. You want to just mix it until it's got a nice kind of base together for it. If it's too wet, you want to add a little bit more flour to it. And you just never know like how many oats you got in there in your cup, whether you got more or less, you know, depending on how packed they are.
Would you ever try to make funfetti from scratch?
That's what I said. I have tried to make everything, but you have to have those special sprinkles on there to really get it. Otherwise, they kind of, you know, the sprinkles dissolve into the cake and they don't turn out pretty on there. I can make the base flavor of the cake part, but you don't get the fun bougie like rainbow sprinkles on there. And I guess I could always buy those specially coated sprinkles. But I don't know. The box is so good. And it just reminds me of childhood because that was also, I feel like everybody made that cake. That was the cake at everybody's birthday party growing up. Everybody had it. And it's just good. Okay, this is kind of the crumb that I want for our topping here. So put this to the side. I'm gonna give my hands just a little rinse here. Okay, and now I'm gonna turn my bacon down just a smidge. And now that our pears are looking good, we are going to add a little bit of cornstarch here. That's gonna act as the thickener and kind of create a nice little gel on our pears that will allow all of that nice flavorful sauce to cling to the pears instead of it being soupy. We're going to dust it over and then we'll mix it in. Don't just like make a big clump in the middle or you'll kind of get like a cornstarch, almost like a dumpling. But mix it in. And that butter in there that you added in there will help kind of get rid of that chalkiness flavor that cornstarch can have. And, you know, kind of those less, you know, heavy bases. Add a little bit more. You're going to use around a tablespoon, tablespoon and a half to get the right thickness that you want. But I just go by little, and then I stop once I see the sauce, kind of the fruit juices from our pears kind of coating up the apples well. Or the apples, not the pears well. They just look too much like apples. Just don't leave it too runny, because then it will bubble up into your crisp, and it will make it to where it's like it will flood it to where it won't crisp up as nice. Here we go. This looks about perfect. So you can see how that sauce just coats each one on there nicely. Beautiful. So every time you stir, it just moves with it. I'm going to turn my heat off and set this over here. Move this right up here. And then I'm going to spread out and push my pears down. We're done with this. And then we're going to take our crumb topping and we're going to sprinkle it over the top. And we'll try to do it as evenly, and then we'll fill back in. There. And then we're going to pop this in the oven at 350, and it's going to bake for about 25 minutes on there. And that's why with pears, you don't have to worry so much about it, but you want your your crumb topping to cook up, which takes about 25 minutes. But when you do like a harder fruit like an apple, you really need to pre-cook the apples. Otherwise, they will be too firm and they won't be soft and tender in that 25-minute bake. But if you bake it longer, you risk burning your crumb. And you could always tent your crumb with aluminum foil, but I find it's just easier to pre-cook them up. But let's go get this in the oven at 350, and it will cook nicely. The pears will continue to cook underway, so they've already got it nice. My Dutch oven is nice and toasty as well. Slide that in there, and we'll set my timer for 25 minutes, and it will be nice and ready. And this batch also works really well if you need to take it to go or for somebody in a loaf pan, like one of those aluminum foil loaf pans. It fits perfectly in it. Okay, our bacon looks pretty darn good, nice and crispy. It's at that kind of medium crisp. I don't like it to get too firm because I don't want it to be hard and crunchy in our soup. I like it to be a little bit more soft. But enough to have our flavor out. I'm going to remove our bacon and put it to the side, and that's where we'll add our meat to it. There we go. And let's put it. Just make sure I get all those little bits. We're going to sear off our meat in here after we season it up, and then we'll cook all of our vegetables kind of in those meat drippings. We've got carrots, onions, mushrooms, garlic. We'll make our rich kind of base. And then we'll throw this all back in at the very end. There. Okay, good enough. So we've got our bacon right there. Crispy, but not rock hard crispy. And now we're going to just kind of season up our meat on here. We're going to use a little bit of black pepper. And I'm going to turn up my pan just a little bit now, since we're about to drop this in here. A little bit of onion powder. We have some rosemary. Nice little sprinkle over. Don't go too heavy on it. Dried rosemary is a pretty strong flavor, so I used probably around half a teaspoon. And then same with thyme, I'm going to use probably around a half a teaspoon because these spices will stay in the pot and continue to release out their flavors. So less is more on those because they can be a little overpowering if you go a little heavy-handed. Now, if you're using fresh herbs, you can definitely use more because they're not quite as strong. And then we're going to add in a little bit of garlic salt, about a teaspoon or so. We'll give this a good toss. I'll just toss it over my bowl. And then we're going to drop them in to our bacon grease, and we will let them start to cook up. Just making sure they kind of get nice and toasted. And in here in this bowl, this is just like stew meat from the grocery store. So it's beef that we're going to sear it off. And typically when you get stew meat from the grocery store, it is just random cuts of beef that are left over from when they're trimming up their different roasts and stuff. So it's not all from one cut of meat. It's just the odds and ends. Yeah. Get that going. I think we can slide these all on here, because I think we can make it to where they each have a spot. It will be a snug fit, but we can make it fit instead of having to do 2 batches. Okay, we're going to sear them off on both sides until we have a nice kind of medium rare in there. When we take them out, we'll let them kind of sit and cook for it, or they'll sit with our bacon and continue to cook through that residual heat, but then we'll throw them back in our soup at the very end. Okay, while we're waiting for that, let's prep up our veggies that are going to go in next. We're going to have our onion, and then we'll have carrots, mushrooms, garlic on here. So it's kind of a nice, lovely, rich, wonderful stew base.
You have questions? Can you go over what you've done so far?
Yes. So we have about a half a pound of bacon that we chopped up, and then we sauteed in the pan, and then we are searing off our about a pound of stew meat that we seasoned with rosemary, black pepper, thyme, onion powder, and garlic salt. And we're going to sear those off on both sides, kind of cook them to a nice medium rare, and then we'll remove them out and put them with our bacon. And then we're up to right now where we're gonna we're chopping up our onions, and we're gonna sear off our veggies next, and then we'll finish up our soup. This is for our beef carbonnade stew, which has just a lovely rich beef stew. Got our carrots, or our onions. It's fun. I always say chopping that, but if I look at something else, I'm instantly say the wrong thing. Okay, it looks like some of my pieces of meat might be ready to flip over. It looks we've got some nice sears on them.
Yeah, cowboy hat.
Yeehaw. There we go. So we're going to flip these. And turn my pan up just a little bit more to kind of cook off that extra liquid. And this is going to have such great flavor from the bacon as well. And that's kind of like the highlight of the soup. That bacon was really going to make this such a rich flavor in the stew. That is just really, really nice. Here. Flip that around. Get these all turned. And then once these are kind of a nice sear off on the other side, we can start removing them.
Brenda Santiago.
Well, thank you, Brenda. We appreciate that. Here we go. And just about all. I said they were kind of packed in there, but I said we made it all in one batch. We'll sear these off nice and quick. While those are searing, I'm going to get my garlic kind of mashed up. I'm going to use a good amount of garlic because, again, it's going to be nice and hearty with this stew. and it's just gonna be wonderful. In about a minute or so, we'll take out our meat. We don't want to overcook it. I want to cook it to a nice kind of medium rare. So if you were to cut into it, you'd have a nice pink center, pinkish red center on there. Again, when you take it out, it's going to continue to cook in our little bowl over there, and we will be tossing it back in at the very end for that. Get these garlic minced up nicely. It will be about a tablespoon and a half when I'm done mincing it up. Here. Get this a nice dice up. And let's check on our meat. I think we should be about ready to take out. Smells wonderful. The rosemary and the bacon already just smells just lovely. We'll remove this, and then we'll cook our onions and kind of our meat drippings there, and then we'll add in our garlic, and then we'll dice up our carrots next. But it's really important that you don't just try to take a shortcut and leave your meat and your bacon in there. Doing that will cause your meat to get overcooked and get really, really rubbery and just won't turn out as well. You want your and it prevents your vegetables from getting a really nice sear on them. So make sure you take them out and sear off your vegetables so they get a good sear and your meat doesn't overcook, because we're doing a quick version of the soup, which means we're not stewing it for that extra hour. Now you can definitely put this back in the oven and stew it for an hour to make everything again fall apart tender for this, but you can also eat it right away. And sometimes it's nice to have soups that you can eat right away instead of just having to do like a 2-hour wait on it. Let me grab a little bit of butter in here to add with our onions. There we go. And then I'm going to turn my pan down to about a 5 since we're no longer searing off our meat. And as you can see, our onions are picking up all of those spices and those little meat drippings, and it will season them up lovely. Once they're nice and translucent and have a little bit of a goldish coloring to them, we'll drop our garlic in. Move that over here. Let's get our carrots peeled and diced.
What's your favorite thing to cook?
Probably I love making homemade ravioli and homemade pasta. Now it is definitely work, labor, but I really like it because everything is from scratch and it's just so delicious. And it's one of those meals that everybody in my family really loves. So that is probably one of my favorite things to make. And it's my husband's favorite meal. And I think it's also my son's favorite meal. So I would say I really love making ravioli. And I love when I'm doing it, like baking and decorating a cake. When it's like the crazy fancy cakes, like for my kid's birthday and they ask for something ridiculous, I do love that. As long as it's not under a time crunch. I don't like doing anything under a time crunch. Okay, let's get our carrots here. I'm going to dice them up so that we don't have too big of chunks on there. That way they'll get nice and tender a little bit faster. Gives them a little bit of help. So I'm quartering our bigger parts of the carrots. The smaller part I just left, nice and small, or just in half, because those don't need to be quartered. But the big, thick part, quarter it up, because otherwise it's a huge piece of carrot.
Do you ever make tier cakes?
Yes, I do. Typically, most of the time, I'll do the I'll do the tall stack ones. I do mini ones that are like a 5-layer cake. But I have made for one of my friend's wedding. That was kind of my gift to her for her wedding. I made her wedding cake for her, and that was a 3-tiered cake. And I decorated it with like white roses, eucalyptus leaves, baby breath on there. It was really, really pretty. She wanted it was a very like natural one. So I had it on like this wooden stump base there, and she wanted like the scraped buttercream around where you saw kind of like a crumb coating. It turned out really, really pretty. And was a really simple, kind of cake. And I did a butter cake base for that with fresh strawberries in the middle. It was delicious. But I have done tiered cakes before on there. I don't make cakes often because, to be honest, I'm not a huge cake person to eat, as in the sense that I don't love cakes, but I enjoy making cakes. Let's add our garlic in. There we go. We're going to let this saute up. Get a nice little flavor, or crisp it up just a second before we add our onion or our carrots in. The cameraman is about to lose the meat bowl because he keeps stealing the beef out of it and the bacon. Okay, let's get our mushrooms sliced up. Do you need a napkin? Yeah. There we go. So I'm going to slice up our mushrooms. I've got a good amount of mushrooms here. I'm using, these are just white button mushrooms. They were on like super sale this week. Normally I get baby bellas because I love baby bellas, but I've got these. I'm cutting them, I like to do whole mushrooms for a couple of reasons. Whole mushrooms stay fresh longer, and I can slice them thinner, which means you get a better sear on your mushrooms. And more mushrooms in every bite. And there's going to be a lot of mushrooms in this soup. That's kind of what it is. Kind of like a beef and mushroom soup, but delicious. There, and then we're going to toss our carrots in just a second. Let's give our garlic a little stir.
What's a good substitute if you don't like mushrooms?
So if you don't like mushrooms, it's kind of you'd have to kind of change up the soup a little bit and go in a different directions. You could sub it out for a potato and just do a potato soup and do a beef and potato. Or you could, if you like zucchini, you could sub in zucchini, which would be a somewhat similar texture to mushrooms, but not really the flavor. Mushrooms are kind of hard to kind of match that flavor and texture. They're unique on their own in there. So you would have to just kind of change it out with a whole nother vegetable. But this soup would pair lovely with both potatoes, or you could do a zucchini. You could just pick a vegetable and sub it completely out for it. It would just kind of change the dynamic of it. But they'd all kind of work well with it. I would say potatoes would be a really good one because, carrots, onions, bacon, they all work with potatoes. There we go. And if you're going to use a potato, you're going to want to you could either use like the baby Dutch potatoes or Yukon Gold. Don't use a russet potato because they're not really great for soups because they kind of, when you cook them for too long, they just kind of dissolve away, turn to mush. So you're going to want one that will hold its shape a little bit better, which will help soak in the broth and the flavor. There we go. Okay, let's get these mushrooms in sauteing. So we have, this is about 12 ounces of mushrooms, so like 1.5 cartons of mushrooms, but sliced nice and thin. which makes you feel like you have more mushrooms than you do.
You have a question? Is it possible to make homemade bread if you don't have a KitchenAid mixer?
Oh yes, I make homemade. I make homemade bread all the time, and I rarely use my KitchenAid mixer for it because I just don't want to lug it out. Sourdough is really easy to make without your KitchenAid mixer, and same with a yeast bread. The only thing is like if you want the light and fluffy things, people with the KitchenAid, it's easier because it doesn't stick to you as much. But when I make like just earlier this week, I made a cinnamon swirl bread, and it's a really light and fluffy bread, but that means that dough is a little bit sticky. What I do when I'm working with it is I just coat my hands in butter because there's already butter in the dough. And that allows me to work with it without it sticking and creating all this tack on me. So I work a little bit more butter into the dough, which makes it delicious. But I don't have to worry about, you know what I mean, like it sticking all over and part not. So yes, you can definitely make homemade bread without a KitchenAid mixer. It's really, really easy on there. I mean, they've been making breads for hundreds and hundreds of years, and KitchenAid mixers have only been around since, you know, the beginning of the century. Okay. Last century, you're right. I guess we've been in this century for a while, haven't we? You know, I feel like, I don't know if anyone else likes me, but you feel like the 90s were like last week. That's me, you know. But I feel like it's just the other day we were celebrating, you know, the 2000s and Y2K. I still remember my mom panicking for when it was turning, you know, the year 2000, and she stocked up on canned goods in our basement downstairs just in case the end of the world happened, just in case. A little paranoid there. It did not happen, except I remember some guy from Blockbuster got like some like multi-million-dollar fee for a late movie. Outside of that, we are going to make our sandwiches, and we have those starting to cook up. So we have our honey. It was kind of a honey oat bread with what I did is a kind of a honey inclusion. So I put it during our swirls in there. So it has this nice kind of faint honey flavor to it, where you see these are like the pockets where the honey was, and it is so delicious. My husband said this is one of his favorites because it has just this very, very mild sweetness to it, which I actually think is going to pair really, really well for the sandwiches, because it's not a exceptionally sweet bread, but it has that, you know, almost like a honey wheat, those nice little undertones to it. And then, of course, we have our nice oaty top to it. But just during I didn't actually put the honey in the dough because honey increases the speed of the proofing. And I didn't want it to proof so fast. But what I did is during the lamination process, I just drizzled it on there so you can get that honey flavor. And it was delicious. Okay, let me grab my butter. Spread a little bit of this butter on each side. Now, the only downside of doing the honey during the lamination process is it does make it have a little bit more of a bubbly bread, which I know lots of people love the bubbles on there. I typically like a tighter crumb, so I typically have a slightly shorter proofing time to have a tighter crumb. And the only reason I like a tighter crumb versus the big open crumb is simply because I like butter on my sourdough, and when you have big holes in it, that butter tends to fall through.
Do you have a question? Is your butter knife wood?
It is. So this butter knife was actually gifted from my friend from Sweden. From her mom lives in Sweden, and so she always sends me a little stuff from it. So this is my butter paddle, and I swear my family cannot live without our butter paddle. If you've never had a butter paddle, you've never lived before, because this thing's amazing. It's the best. It spreads butter so nicely. And my kids, when it goes missing and it goes missing because Jack will steal it, and then I'll have to go search for it, and then it has to get a deep cleaning because he stole it and ate the butter off of it. But it is just spreads the butter so smoothly, and it is just so wonderful. We're gonna get our cheese on there in just a second.
Back to sourdough. You have a question. What is the lamination process?
So the lamination is after you've you've done your counterproofing on your dough, like so that bulk proof. You stretch it out into this big rectangle, which is what you're going to do right before the shaping. And this is where you can add in some inclusions, where those are like extra flavors like cheese or cinnamon sugar, spices or whatnot, or you can keep it plain. And then you kind of fold it over and then you roll it up. So it's the stretching out process, which helps kind of develop the shape of your dough so that it's not super flat, but actually like rises up on there. And so that's the lamination process. And I feel like with most people, until you start your sourdough journey, there's a lot of terminology and things that you just don't know because there's just a lot of things, you know. I remember when I started, I was like, what do you mean by stretch and fold? Because when I make yeast bread, we call it kneading. But for sourdough, you don't knead, you do stretch and fold because it's a high hydration dough, which means it's a very sticky dough. So it's different working with sourdough than with a yeast dough, but I will say it's very rewarding and it is very delicious. Okay, we've got some cheeses here. This is called the El Diablo, which is a scorpion pepper Gouda. And we're debating whether we can do a sandwich with all scorpion pepper Gouda or whether we need to do a half and half on it. So we're gonna give a nice little, I'm gonna have the cameraman test out the cheese first. I'll do a little thing. Well, I'll start going on there. He's good to go. We'll do my sandwich is going to be just regular Gouda because if you guys know me, I can handle next to no spice. Okay, so we've got our scorpion pepper Gouda on there. Nice kind of coating. And then over here, I've got my good old block of regular Gouda because Gouda is probably my favorite cheese. And it's a cheese I kind of grew up on because we always had this on our Swedish smorgasbords. And it's just always a cheese we had because, you know, it's a European cheese and my mom is Swedish. So we always had it around. Let's give this a nice little thing. And then we're going to go grab our apple crisp out of the oven. I'm going to turn on, while we're waiting, I'm going to turn on my griddle pan so it can start warming up. And then we grab this out. So we've got our apple crisp, or not our apple crisp, our pear crisp. See, it gets me every time. Baking up here. It's been baking at 350 for 25 minutes. Looks gorgeous. We've got a nice golden crust around the edges.
Would Havarti be good cheese for sandwiches?
Excellent. Havarti and Gouda have very similar flavor profiles. They're both kind of a semi-soft, creamy cheese, which have really wonderful melting profiles, which I think make them excellent for grilled cheeses because they give you that wonderful, like, ooey gooey pull. So this is our pear crisp. We spiced up our pears underneath with cinnamon, a little bit of vanilla, lemon juice, and brown sugar. And then we topped them off with a lovely brown sugar oat crisp made with brown sugar, cinnamon, flour, touch of salt, and of course a little bit of baking powder, which gives it this nice little puff, which makes it wonderful. Okay, we're gonna add on some salami to our sandwich here. This is going to, I feel like it's going to pair well with the scorpion Gouda because salami, I find that you want to pair it with a more mild cheese like a Gouda or Havarti because it has a strong flavor and you don't want it to be overpowering. There we go. And then let's get our next round. on here. And then we'll get these cooking up, and then we're going to finish up our stew on there. The nice part is most of this stew is really cooking up the mushrooms right now and having them come out their flavor, and then we'll add our next kind of part in. We'll get these guys cooking here. Let's get our scorpion cheese. So for my husband's birthday, we kind of gifted him this nice cheese, specialty cheese thing, and he's got all these like really cool cheeses that have those wonderful flavors to them. So it's always fun to make these new grilled cheeses with them, and it's just fun to try like doing new things with that. Okay, these look like we've got some great saute on them. So we're going to add in our tomato paste right now. Yep. We're going to add in about a good tablespoon or so. Nice little squeeze. We're going to coat this up. Let that stew for just a second. And then we're going to add in just a bit more thyme and rosemary and some of our spices. And then we're going to add a sprinkle of flour in here because, again, that's going to be our thickener for this. So let's get our spices in here. Don't go too heavy on these because, again, they have a bit of a nice kind of kick to them. But a nice little sprinkle over, just a little bit more. Using like just around a half a teaspoon max. And a little black pepper. And I think we're good. We don't need to add any more garlic salt because we're going to use our beef bouillon here. Give this a nice stir. Wonderful. And now we're going to add our flour to coat up our vegetables, which will also be our base that will help thicken up our stew. Where did I put my measure? There it is. So we're going to just start by dusting over, and then we'll coat up our mushrooms with this. So a nice kind of dust over like this. You don't want to just plop a whole bunch in there at a time. Dust it and then coat it up. There we go. And then we'll add some more. We'll do it in stages. That way it will thicken up nicely. Turn my little things right there. Okay, and then we're going to add a little bit more. You're going to use around 1/4 of a cup of flour max. But again, little by little, because we want it to kind of absorb up. And then we're going to add in we'll add it in our beer first and then our beef broth. There we go. And then our soup is pretty much done. We just have to add in our meat chunks and whatnot. It's one of those things where it comes together pretty quickly at the end. Let's get just making sure. There we go, nice and toasty. We need about a 1/2 cup of a beer. And we're just going to pour a little bit over. And we're going to deglaze the bottom of our pan. And then I'm going to add just a little bit more. And I'm using this to kind of deglaze. It will cook off kind of the alcohol content first and just leave those nice flavors behind. There we go. And I think we've got one more splash to get us there. Okay. So now we've got this nice kind of thick coated here. And now we're going to do our beef bouillon and our water. So I've got my water here. I'm going to add it in slowly. We're going to use up to 4 cups, but I'm going to mix it and stop once I get to the consistency that I want. And then I'll add in a nice scoop of beef bouillon. So little by little, because you don't want to flood it and then you have it too watery, because again, we want this to be a nice thick stew. There. Mix around to get all of those spices incorporated. Mixing it up, and then just again scrape on the bottom as you go. And a little bit more. I'm gonna let it simmer for just a second. I'm gonna check on my grilled cheeses here, and then we'll add some more into our soup. Let's see how these are cooking up. We've got a good melting on here, just about. I'm gonna give them a quick rotation. We'll flip over, and then we'll start heating up on the other side, and we'll kind of finish off. And then once we get our broth in here, I'm going to turn up my base a little bit so it heats up a little bit nicer. Here we go. So far I've got about 2 cups in here, and it's looking pretty good. And again, we still are going to have to add back in our bacon and our meat chunks.
Oh, Paula sent you another good.
Oh, well, thank you, Paula. We truly appreciate that. Here we go. And I'm going to scrape around. I'm going to let this come up to a simmer. We might add a little bit more, but I'm going to add in my beef bouillon while we wait. I want it to come up to a boil because as it heats up, it typically, why am I scooping in the water? We're going to do a nice heaping spoonful of our beef bouillon. This is going to flavor up the base of our soup, add the saltiness factor on here, which will add just, again, great flavor. There we go. Once that's kind of dissolved, we'll see if we need to add any more. And I think I'm going to add just a smidge more liquid, but I don't think I'm going to use all of it. I think I used about 3 cups of my liquid. And then to give our stew just a really rich color and a nice touch of flavor, we're going to add in just a little bit of kitchen bouquet, which is a nice browning thing. Just a small bit, but it's going to turn this to a really rich color. I'm going to add a little bit more. A little goes a long way, and it adds really great flavor. There we go. And a wonderful color. Let's check on our grilled cheeses over here. Wonderful. They are toasting up nicely. You can see that Gouda is already starting to melt all the way through on here. Okay. And that is, again, it's on our honey oat bread, and we have our Gouda. One's a scorpion Gouda, the other is regular. And then we have our salami, and it's just going to be a delicious grilled cheese sandwich. Let me taste this base, see if we need to add any more bouillon. Then we can toss in our meat, and then we'll garnish it with our parsley and our green onions. Oh, I don't think we need to add any more salt. Or bouillon, I should say. Let's get these chopped up. We'll let that simmer for just a second. So I have fresh parsley here and green onions, this is a nice rich stew, but this adds just a really fresh burst at the end. You want to add it right at the end because, again, it's a nice kind of garnishing herb to it, which is wonderful.
You have a question? Did you make the bread from scratch?
Yes, I did. It is a sourdough loaf that we then added a honey inclusion where I swirled it during the lamination process. And then we have kind of an oat crust on the outside. So delicious, really fresh, like just a traditional loaf basically, but so good. It has a really touch of sweetness to it, not an overly powerful sweet bread, but almost like a honey wheat. Or actually really like a honey white, I should say, but lovely. Okay, let's get our meat in here. So this is our stewed off meat and our bacon. Pop this back into our bowl. Look at that. Beautiful. And now I'm going to add in my green onions and my parsley. I'll save a few to garnish with, and then we will be ready to serve up here. There we go. Okay. Gorgeous. Beautiful. Okay. We've got our grilled cheeses ready. We've got our pear crisp, and we are ready to serve up dinner or lunch. Dinner. Okay. Slide this out of the way. And bring this. We need a ladle for our soup. It just looks wonderful. Okay, let me bring our grilled cheese over here. Okay. Oh, let me grab it first and cut it in half. Okay. We have our homemade grilled cheese here on our sourdough, honey sourdough bread with our Gouda and salami. And this will be delicious on with our beef carbonade soup, which is made with bacon, beef stew meat, and a rich beef-based sauce, mushrooms, carrots, onions. But again, it's just really rich beef broth that it just makes the soup so wonderful on there. Well, and it's just such a hearty soup and stew. We have a little bit of rosemary, thyme in there, and a bit of tomato paste that really brings these flavors together. And then for a touch of sweetness at the end, we will serve up our pear crisp with this lovely oat crumb on the top. We spiced up our pears with cinnamon, vanilla, lemon juice, and brown sugar. So they've just got this wonderful warm spices to it and that great oaty crisp crumb topping on it. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining us here. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I try to do live cooking shows every single day, kind of show you what we're making for our family and hopefully teach you guys something along the way. Again, we do upload all of our videos to the link on our page. So if you ever want to recreate any of these recipes at home, you can just go to our page and search for what we made, our beef carbonade and our pear crisp, and you can always watch and cook along with us again. We also have a link to our Amazon storefront that has all of our different cooking gear and gadgets in it. I've got my griddle pan, my Dutch ovens, my knives, cutting boards, all the different things that I use for sourdough. I have in there for you guys to check out. But again, thank you so much for joining us here. Don't forget to like and subscribe.